University to begin their presentation.
Sorry, just a minute.
Perfect, thank you. Hi everyone, we are Team KEAN Solutions, and we wanted to start by expressing our gratitude to the Canadian Evaluation Society and the Gord Downie and Chani Wanjak Fund. We, as settlers and immigrants, we recognize the privileges we carry and our social positions in our lifelong commitment to a path towards reconciliation. We respectfully acknowledge that we are uninvited guests on the unceded Coast Salish land, the territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Coquitlam, Squamish, and Musqueam First Nations. We also recognize that the organization is located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We acknowledge that the area is covered by Treaty 13 signed with Mississaugas of the Credit.
Our team is made up of Kim, Elmira, Anna, and myself, Nicole, and we are a group of hardworking individuals who use an equity-centered lens in our work. We come from diverse backgrounds and bring different cultural perspectives to our work, and the values we hold, which are reflected in our plan, include equity, integrity, and creativity. Next is an outline of what we will cover in our presentation. You will be able to follow each section throughout this presentation. So the Gord Downie and Chani Wanjak Fund aims to build cultural understanding and create a path towards reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. The fund was inspired by Chani Wanjak's story, a 12-year-old Anishinaabe boy who was forced to attend a residential school and fell victim to it when he attempted to escape to reunite with his family. Along with Gord Downie's call to build a better Canada, the fund's goal is to improve the lives of Indigenous people by building awareness, education, and connections between all people in Canada. The fund has four core values, which are reflected on the slide. And the fund's strategic priorities include awareness, education, action, and connection. We will refer to the fund as DWF going forward in the presentation. The DWF has several initiatives to help them achieve their strategic priorities. Common between these programs is the Secret Path graphic novel, the CBC documentary, and music written by Gord Downie. The initiatives include Legacy Schools, which is an initiative that aims to engage students and educators to further reconciliation efforts through awareness, education, and action. The legacy spaces are designated spaces that are dedicated to providing accurate information regarding Indigenous history and the journey of reconciliation for corporations, governments, organizations, and educational institutions to participate. In terms of special events and outreach, there is the Secret Path Week, National Indigenous Peoples Day and History Month, fundraising initiatives, and social media and digital campaigns. And finally, the Youth Ambassadors Programs is a program that offers youth the opportunity to gain experience supporting a national charity to further reconciliation in Canada while meeting other inspiring youth from Canada. Youth who are interested in continuing with DWF are invited to create a volunteer youth advisory council to help guide the programming and champion the work of the fund. The scope of our evaluation will involve helping DWF prepare to evaluate its impacts.
So this logic model demonstrates our understanding of the Downey and Wenjack Fund. It shows the fund's inputs and activities and how they work to ultimately increase the movement towards reconciliation and enhance the quality of life for all Indigenous peoples in Canada. So here we break down the logic model and have the inputs that go into the program. These include the board of directors, partner groups, including community partners and media partners, funding from donors and sponsors, artists, educators, as well as facilities, materials, and resources required. The activities that result from these inputs are education activities, such as educator training for legacy schools and legacy spaces, legacy schools toolkit formation and distribution, as well as educational sessions. There are also awareness raising activities across various programs, including fundraising events, establishing legacy spaces within organizations and corporations, as well as social media campaigns. Lastly, there are action and connection activities, such as the Reconciliation and Artist Ambassador events. So these activities lead to numerous outputs, which then lead to the short-term, medium-term, and long-term outcomes. The short-term outcomes include increasing access to education about Indigenous experiences and ways of being, increased awareness about reconciliation, increased engagement among schools, organizations, and communities, as well as an increased connection among all people living in Canada. These lead to the medium-term outcomes of increased knowledge about Indigenous experiences and ways of being, increased knowledge about reconciliation, increased cultural competence, and increased empowerment. These ultimately lead to the long-term outcome of enhancing the quality of life for all Indigenous peoples in Canada and increasing the movement towards reconciliation. Here we list the assumptions, risks, and external factors that underlie and influence the DWF. So the fund operates under the assumption that moving towards reconciliation and improving the quality of life of all Indigenous peoples in Canada is best achieved through education, awareness, and action and connection. Some risks we have identified include the potential for lack of program support from some communities, the potential for white fragility, thus preventing non-Indigenous from confronting racism, and lastly, the potential to resurface trauma. External factors influencing the fund are community support for the programs, operating within the COVID-19 context, as well as the historical impacts of colonialism.
We thought it would be important to highlight the impact of COVID-19. We acknowledge that COVID-19 has exacerbated inequities faced by Indigenous communities, and our proposed strategies have been adapted to the current circumstances. We know that there are limitations to an online environment. However, we believe it's important to adhere to public health guidelines to ensure the health and safety of those involved.
For the purposes of the proposal, we've divided stakeholders into 3 groups: involved, supportive, and peripheral. Involved stakeholders help plan the evaluation and are consulted often. Supportive stakeholders help with the evaluation in some way, and peripheral stakeholders are not directly involved but are kept in the know. We propose the formation of an evaluation working group consisting of the involved stakeholders, including up to 2 Youth Advisory Council members, 1 Artist Ambassador, 2 members of the Board of Directors, an educator, and an elder. The goal of the working group is to guide the evaluation based on stakeholders' needs and expertise, help them build capacity to carry out parts of the evaluation themselves, and also lend their voice to what program changes need to be made. We propose that the first meeting of the evaluation working group will take the form of a World Cafe via Zoom. World Cafe is a method of facilitating dialogue within a group. It's meant to operate using the 7 principles shown on the slide. The idea is that group members discuss certain topics in small groups and note their key ideas. The goal of holding a World Cafe will be to foster an inclusive environment for the evaluation working group and discuss initial goals, ideas, and needs regarding the evaluation. The method we propose conducting this on Zoom will be through 2 breakout rooms consisting of about 3 to 4 group members each, with each room hosting its own topic for members to discuss. Members will rotate between these rooms and then return to the main Zoom session at the end to make any final decisions regarding the evaluation. KEAN Solutions aims to help provide the stakeholders with the training, tools, and knowledge necessary to help lead the evaluation. The type of evaluation we've chosen is an impact evaluation, given that the DWF wants to evaluate its impacts. The approach we plan to take is an empowerment approach. An empowerment approach would allow us to help empower stakeholders to lead their own evaluation. This is also in line with DWF's core values. We also plan to integrate culturally responsive Indigenous evaluation in our methods and mitigation strategies. Given that none of our team members identify as Indigenous, we feel it's important to take necessary steps toward building a research and evaluation partnership with DWF. The steps involved in this process, which was described by Teach for Canada, includes respecting a community-first approach by identifying a process, then building authentic relationships, including traditional knowledge, cultural norms, and values in the proposal design, submitting the proposal, and conducting research and evaluation in partnership with the community.
So in the interest of time, as we go through the evaluation matrix, I will go through the evaluation questions as well as one of the sub-questions. We will draw on both qualitative and quantitative indicators. Also, these proposed evaluation questions are preliminary, as we would like to incorporate input from the working group for the finalized questions. So the first question we have is, to what extent did DWF produce its intended outcomes? And a sub-question for this is, what were the intended and unintended outcomes of the programs? Some indicators we will use for this question include impressions of intended and unintended outcomes and perceptions of knowledge about Indigenous experiences and reconciliation. And we will draw on the data sources from Youth Advisory Council, Legacy School Partners, Youth Ambassadors, and Legacy students. And the data will be collected through individual storytelling and sharing circles. The next question we have is, to what extent is DWF supporting reconciliation? And the sub-question for this is, to what extent has DWF effectively integrated reconciliation into their programming? And the indicators for this question will be perceptions of increased movement toward reconciliation and perceptions of increased desire for reconciliation among people in Canada. And the data sources we will draw on will be Youth Advisory Council, Legacy School Partners, Youth Ambassadors, and Legacy students. And we will collect data through online surveys, individual storytelling, and activity-oriented focus groups.
So we've identified 5 potential methods for collecting data, which can be used for the data collection system. Our idea with proposing these methods is to collaborate with the evaluation working group to develop them, provide the resources and tools necessary to build the capacity required to carry these on independently past KEAN Solutions involvement. We believe it's important to work with the working group and empower them to develop these tools, as it's important that we as evaluators are not appropriating any methods. These data methods include document review, which will involve reviewing past evaluations and any other relevant key documents. We also propose using an online survey, which will be made up of different types of questions in order to be more interesting, with the aim of increasing the response rate. Individual storytelling will involve respondents talking about their experience with the programs. We propose also a sharing circle facilitated by an elder. However, the facilitation can be reassessed by the working group depending on capacity. And I will elaborate on activity-oriented focus groups on the next slide. So we propose activity-oriented focus groups that would take place over Zoom. For confidentiality purposes, we would suggest respondents use an alias and change their background on Zoom if they wish. We propose using activities such as mind mapping. This activity allows for respondents to express their feelings and opinions about a topic in a creative way. This could be facilitated by anyone from the working group. So in keeping with our empowerment approach, we propose using the expectations to change participatory method of working with evaluation findings. This iterative approach aims to engage stakeholders with their evaluation findings as a way of trying to help them build evaluation capacity. It's a workshop-based approach that would involve working group members, beginning by setting standards and expectations they'll use when examining the findings. The rest of the process would involve the group comparing the findings to the expectations they set out, prioritizing these findings, discussing the meaning of these findings, and making recommendations for each finding. Lastly, the group will highlight each of the recommendations and which working group member would be willing to take action on it.
So here we've noted some potential challenges, our proposed mitigation strategies, and the competencies we would use to address the challenges. First, we identified the historical impact of colonialism and the ethical considerations that may arise from that. We believe that data sovereignty, which means that communities have ownership over their data, is crucial, as is using a trauma-informed lens and strengths-based language throughout the evaluation. We propose obtaining informed consent before all data collection methods and recognize that consent should take place throughout, therefore obtaining consent throughout the entire evaluation process. The competencies we've applied are competency 1.3, integrating the Canadian Evaluation Society's stated ethics and professional practice, as well as competency 3.7, using evaluation processes and practices that support reconciliation and build strong relationships among Indigenous and non-Indigenous people.
A second challenge we need to consider are the cultural differences among the different stakeholders involved. In order to mitigate cultural differences, we will hire an external facilitator to provide the working group with cultural safety training, much like the Sanya's Indigenous cultural safety training here in BC. We will focus on highlighting the importance of ongoing self-reflection for all involved stakeholders, and we suggest having group meetings to discuss any issues that have surfaced and how to resolve and prevent similar situations to happen in the future. We also aim to create an inclusive, non-judgmental environment in which involved stakeholders can share their feelings and experiences. The competencies we have applied for this challenge are 1.7 uses self-awareness and reflective thinking to continually improve practice. And again, 3.7 uses evaluation processes and practices that support reconciliation and build stronger relationships among Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples.
So another challenge we have identified is technological barriers and issues, and the mitigation strategies we propose for this include offering participation via telephone for participants who may not have access to computers or internet, mailing out survey questions with a return envelope for those who prefer to receive hard copies, ensuring flexibility with scheduling certain data collection methods, and DWF meetings, and lastly, making sure that data collection sessions and DWF meetings are meaningful, efficient, and engaging in an attempt to limit Zoom fatigue. The credential evaluator competency we have applied is 3.2, identify stakeholders' needs and their capacity to participate while recognizing, respecting, and responding to aspects of diversity. And here we have outlined a timeline that meets the estimated consultation time of 45 days. This would begin with the initial meeting to discuss the evaluation plan. Then we will go into the planning phase with the evaluation working group, and the largest amount of time will be allocated to data collection in order to provide participants flexibility to get involved with the evaluation. We will then analyze the collected information, host 2 expectations to change workshops, and lastly, distribute the findings through culturally appropriate knowledge translation.
So in terms of our proposed knowledge translation strategies, we propose an accessible 1.3.25 report that will be developed by the working group. So this takes the form of a 1-page infographic, a 3-page executive summary, and a 25-page report that will use plain language. We also propose a video series that can be published on DWF's website, as well as a data cube that can be created by the working group. This is a tangible visual way of displaying data by printing different findings on each side of the cube. And again, these are just methods we propose now, but we plan to work with the working group to determine other strategies that might be more appropriate.
This concludes our presentation. However, we would like to thank those who supported us, especially Beth Snow, our coach, throughout this experience, as well as former contestants Cassandra and Natasha for their helpful advice at the beginning of our journey. We would also like to thank the Canadian Evaluation Society Education Fund and the Canadian Evaluation Society, as well as the Gord, Downey, and Chani Wanyap Fund for making this opportunity possible for us. We would also like to thank the Faculty of Health Sciences at Simon Fraser University, where we've studied. Thank you so much for listening.
Hey, thank you very much, KEAN Solutions. I'll now hand it over to the judges to ask their questions, and then we will have a question from the Gord Downey and Cheney Wenjack Fund. Okay, judges.
Fantastic, team. You did a great job, and congratulations on making it this far into the competition. The presentation was well laid out. It was clear, concise, easy to follow. I have a question that I'm hoping the team can respond to with respect to their methodology and the adoption of the empowerment approach, because the last sort of stage is seeing who amongst the working group may be able to take responsibility for moving it forward. In the era of COVID and everything else that is going on, overburden is really quite significant at this time. What does the team intend to do if nobody steps forward?
I think I can speak to that. Thank you for the question. It's a great consideration. I think one of the things we can do in taking the empowerment approach is we're hoping to provide all the tools necessary. And if no one steps up, I think what could help is us maybe providing examples of some of these things and and describing what the process would look like, and just trying to teach and provide the resources necessary to develop those, and maybe give a more realistic timeline of what it would look like in creating that stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dominique, you have a question?
Hi everyone. My name is Dominique. Oh, sorry, Frederick. Did I speak over you?
No, I think go ahead, and I guess I would like to give the space for additional questions to the public after your question.
Okay. So thank you very much for the presentation. My question is around how to capture unintended outcomes, or perhaps the voice of individuals, youth, or the perspective among those less likely to participate in the involved stakeholder group. I'd love to hear a couple of ideas that you have about how to make sure that the data that you collect from that involved stakeholder group is balanced and captures as much as possible unintended outcomes, and perhaps the perspective of those that, like I said, would be less likely to participate or be involved in that stakeholder group.
I can speak to that. Thank you for your question. And for ensuring that we have, I guess, equitable amounts of feedback from everybody, we will make sure that we're using purposive sampling to make so reaching out to the different community members and different stakeholders. And we're hoping to do that with the information provided by the organization, if they have any contacts or for who's engaged, who has been engaged, I'm so sorry. But yeah, so using purposive sampling methods to reach out to the different individuals, and making sure that we have representation from the different communities, and also making sure that our engagement strategies are actually engaging and fit to the different demographics. So for youth, making it more technological or youth involved, and fitting, I guess, to the different demographics of the populations we're working with.
Okay, I'd like to thank you very much. I'd like to call on Sarah Mibnick, President and CEO of DWF. Would you like to come up and ask a question?
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to make sure that I was preparing my question for the right group. Thank you so much for the presentation. And I think my question will probably be a bit more challenging, because I'm looking at these proposals of how are we actually going to implement this within our organization. And there's an awful lot of onus put back on the working group. And one of the things I noticed was the condensed timeline. So the timeline for the evaluation, I think, was at 45 days. And I'm thinking about, a lot of our program participants are kind of operating off of the school year. So what ensures that we can track the impact from the start of the program to, say, the end of year 1 in the program? But more so, the work that we're doing, it's not just, numbers in, numbers out for participation. We're talking about programming that seeks to ignite systemic change, which means we'll be looking at longitudinal evaluations over time. So how does this approach fit into, say, a 10-year strategy? And how would this proposal, oh, is that too hard? I'm sorry. Please stop me. How could we, if I can just simplify it a bit, how could we really take this proposal and then be the leaders of it within our organization and our strategy for the future?
Thanks so much for the question. I think when we put all of this forth, especially with taking the empowerment approach, our idea is that we're really hoping to empower members of the working group to decide what to prioritize in this evaluation. And so that might involve adjusting our timeline. So for example, perhaps taking out some of the data collection methods we proposed. Perhaps people in the working group have other methods they would propose. And perhaps also the timeline would be adjusted to reflect, as you said, like a longer strategy. And all of this, I think, is best done in collaboration with the working group and those involved. I also think just us proposing all of this, taking our empowerment approach, it's important for us to acknowledge the power imbalance that might exist there. And so that's why it's important for us to acknowledge and amplify the voices of the people within the organization and allow them to sort of decide what would be best and prioritize needs in terms of a long-term strategy. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. At the end of the day, it really comes back to championing the work internally. So really important to keep that in mind when creating these proposals. So thank you so much for the hard work.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions from the audience, Michael? Well, unless I know that Fred had kind of didn't have a question because he was going to give some room for others. But I'm just wondering, Fred, did you have a question that you'd like to ask? Or
yeah, well, maybe I can finish with something. Thank you so much for the nice proposal. Really enjoyed the presentation. So you mentioned maybe asking some form for external support to helping you with some cultural issues to get some feedback in the process. And I noticed that you're only 4 team members to do all this nice proposal within 45 days. So I'm wondering if you think you have the capacity, being 4, to deliver on the schedule.
I can speak to that. Sorry. I think that the schedule, the timeline that the fund proposed was a little bit of a challenge for us, but I know that we're all very hardworking and we would ensure that we deliver what we sought out to promise to the fund. And the other thing is, sorry, you said the using external facilitators. We felt that was very important because none of us identify as Indigenous, and we wouldn't want to provide training that isn't representative of Indigenous voices. So I think that would not be negotiable in our plan. We would love to have the involvement of an elder and the appropriate training to give to the group so that they can really engage in learning and continue a continued journey of cultural humility, which is a lifelong process.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'd like to take this time to thank all the teams for